Good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for being on time. Today's Friday, as we all know, and we appreciate you stepping in, stopping in, zooming in for this very important conversation that we're going to be having with Honorable Dr. Anthony Andrews Jr. I'm excited to have this conversation today. The subject that we have in front of us is something that is very important to our communities because it really impacts our way of life, how we feel confident about our communities. And so I'm excited to get into that conversation, but just a few announcements just to keep the house in order. We have many callers that are logging in right now, many more that will be joining us. But in the meantime, in between time, feel free to always use the chat if you have any questions or comments or things that you wanted to share with the larger group. Use that as an option. And I want to make sure that that there is a space at the end of this conversation for you to be able to unmute yourself and join in on the conversation with some points, with some questions of our candidate, and also any other comments that you wanted to share. So that space is going to be left for you at the end of the dialogue today, which will be very rich. And additionally, all those that are on the phone, unfortunately, we don't have the ability to get you on right now on the phone, but in the chat, that is. But you know, we will be looking out for any messages that come through on that end. So with no further ado, I'd love to just jump into the conversation. Good evening, Dr. Andrews.
Good evening, JSS. How are you?
I'm blessed. I'm highly favored. I'm excited that it's the 3-day weekend for me. I know there is no weekends for you, but
no nights, no mornings, no afternoons, no weekends, JSS.
Right. A lot of hard work, and we're just I'm excited for all the hard work that you're doing. Just seeing you hitting the ground and having the conversations that you're having with the community and all those doors. I mean, that is just something to be really inspired by, and it really speaks to your dedication to seeing change happen in our community. So in that same vein, if you could just give us a little rundown of your history, your backstory, the things that make you who you are.
For those who haven't been on these calls before, we'll go over it again. Born and raised in South Jamaica, right off Suffolk Boulevard and 119th Avenue. Have been involved in community activism for just about all of my life. I mean, my grandparents were civic leaders. My mother was a civic leader. My mother was a Democratic district leader for years. And I got involved at 16. And really from the age of maybe 17, until maybe my late 20s, early 30s, before I walked away from politics for about a decade. My mentors were Tom Waite and Juanita Watkins, and in the Fred Wilson Democratic Club. They taught me about politics. They taught me about activism. They taught me about the importance of leaders in the community, political leaders, showing love to the community. And that sounds like a very easy thing to assume would happen, right? But you really have to have leaders that really care about the community to sponsor basketball tournaments or pageants, beauty pageants, whatever it takes to be, to be able to get young people involved. We hear about the senior citizen luncheons and things that are being done in Rochdale and, so forth. But as I've talked to the residents in Rochdale in particular, I talked to them about things that we used to do with the young people. We used to have Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, Vic Hampton Recreation Center, where people actually learn how to box so that they would channel their aggression in a boxing ring. 50 Cent learned to box there at the Vic Hampton Recreation Center, which was right there in Rochdale Village. So I've been in this community. I've seen this community grow. And I've seen this community prosper. I've seen the ups and downs, and I've been active in this community for years. As a district leader, 10 years, 14 years as a Democratic State Committee person. Tom Waite first ran me for Democratic State Committee, and I became the youngest Democratic elected official in the history of New York State at the time. And then years later, I joined the Jamaica Center for Arts and Learning Board, JCAL, where we fostered arts. And then, of course, I became a member of the Queens Hospital Center Community Advisory Board and got very involved with healthcare and making sure that we had the proper healthcare for the residents of this community. Also during that time, of course, I began working at York College, and I've been there for, approximately 29 years as the, Associate Director of Student Leadership and Campus Programs. I'm concerned about making sure that the students have extracurricular activities, but more importantly, making sure that we grow the next generation of student leaders and creating leadership opportunities for them to be leaders in society, not just student leaders in the future. And of course, I've been very active with my union, Professional Staff Congress, during that time. And as a labor activist and organizer, I've been very involved with the local level and also the state and the national level with the union. That's just a little bit of my backstory, JSS, for those who don't know it. And, in the process of learning about leadership and activism, I decided to get a doctorate in executive leadership, looking at the world through the prism of social justice. And my passion is working on issues that impact communities of color, especially issues of social justice.
Yeah. That's a story, a very storied, history kind of backstory, and I think it does speak to a lot of your values. I will not belabor our conversation today in terms of getting to the meat of things. So I'd love to just dive right in if that's okay with you.
Sure, great.
Small businesses. A lot of thinking about small businesses recently by myself, I feel like by the community, just because of the tremendous impact that the pandemic has had on our communities, on our small businesses. My question to you is, with the pandemic devastating businesses across the country and disproportionately crippling Black businesses, who could not survive shutdowns and new regulations, what kind of plans do you have to support business development in our community?
Well, I won't take credit for all of these. The first one I'll talk about is creating tax-free Tuesdays across the state. I'd like to have a weekly sales tax holiday, right? So that people in communities of color in particular, people where areas where people are struggling a little bit more than some of the other areas of the state. If I had to start and create a pilot program, I'd want to start it in Southeast Queens. Tax-free Tuesdays, something that Mayor Adams came up with, something that we think would be great and beneficial to people in our community. Maybe this would incentivize people in our community to go out and spend more during the week. Maybe they'd say, hey, we're going to make sure that we go out on Tuesday and spend, because that's a day that we're not going to have to pay taxes, and that could help with our businesses, especially our small businesses that are suffering. I talked to some of the businesses out in the community. I was talking to a businessman today. We were doing a visibility event at Sutphin Boulevard and Arch Avenue with a bunch of friends who were out there supporting us, Charles Attilles and a number of other people. We got out there and handing out literature, and one of the business people came over to me and said, what are you going to do to help us? Because we're really hurting. We have been hurting since the pandemic started. And it's really difficult for us to survive right now. A day like this, just one day a week maybe, where, people would make an effort to go out in this community and spend money more than any other day because they wouldn't have to pay sales tax, would be a day that would probably benefit a lot of our businesses in the community that have to charge sales tax every day. Just one day a week could maybe be the difference between them opening and closing. Sales tax exemption areas for struggling communities. Why couldn't we have certain areas where we would have no sales tax? A novel idea, right? Why not? Let's begin to think out of the box. If we have struggling businesses and communities of color in particular that have been hit, as you say, Jermaine, harder than other communities, why could we do something like that? Bank development districts. Carver Bank on Merrick Boulevard sits in the middle of a bank development district. And I'd like to see more of these created. But again, let's try to see if we can expand the funding, give seed money, low interest grants, loans for businesses that are in the middle of bank development districts. Let's give banks like Carver the ability to be able to lend and to be able to create more microloans and grants for people who are, interested in residing in a bank development district, or who would like to benefit from a bank that is in a bank development district, like Carver, right? Maybe it gets more people to go to Carver in our community than other banks. Maybe because it's in the middle of a bank development district and Carver can do more, maybe we have more businesses in our community that decide to transfer their accounts to Carver. We've been talking for years about a business incubator. We had an opportunity to build a business incubator not too long ago. And unfortunately, there were elected officials who were supposed to get it done, could have gotten it done, had money to get it done, and gave the money to other people.
Wait, I'm sorry to interrupt you, because that's 4 ideas so far. But can you give us an explanation of what a business incubator is?
Sure, great point, Jermaine. Not everybody may know. Years ago, Jim Heiliger came with this idea, which was being used across the state. The Association of Minority Enterprises were talking about a way to get businesses, startup businesses, to prosper, to grow. And this idea of a business incubator came about, right? It was being done throughout, depressed areas throughout the state, where we had people who were starting up businesses. And in this building, they would create a building. And in this building, they would get grants, they would get loans to be able to assist their business, to help their business to grow, i.e. the term incubator, right? Beginning the birth of a business. And they would also have other businesses within this building, and they would be able to share resources. So maybe you had a printing business you were starting up, and somebody else had an accountant business they were starting up. And maybe you decided then, hey, I can help you advertise your business to the accountant. And the accountant says, I can help do your books. So you barter and you share resources in addition to getting money from the state and the federal government, because you're part of this business incubator, which is helping you to grow your business from the beginning. We get startups, people want to start their own business, entrepreneurs, help them to start their businesses, grow their businesses, so that when they're strong enough, just like a baby, they can leave the incubator, and then we can place them on our strips. So many of our strips right now are economically depressed. Sutphin Boulevard, Guy Brewer Boulevard, Rockaway Boulevard, look nothing like Merrick Boulevard in some parts. And that's my big real, my big issue, right? That if we're going to have economic development corridors that can be developed, then let's try to give them the resources to develop. Let's not just watch them continue to devolve into just business strips where people just want to set up a business, and then that business stays for 1 or 2 years, or maybe 3 years, and it folds because it doesn't have the support. We got to do more to help our businesses out, and a business incubator is one way to do it.
Yeah. So the incubator obviously makes sense, and I think those type of resources coming to our community would have a tremendous impact. Are there any other like small business ideas that pop into mind? I mean, a lot of this stuff, the 4 that I've heard so far, sound like they're coming from a place that will definitely generate income for our communities, keeping dollars inside of our communities and making that dollar last longer within our walls. But are there any other ideas that, that your campaign has with relation to continuing that effort?
Yeah, we have a bunch of different ideas on the website. I'll share some of this stuff, some more things, right? So a lot of businesses, when I talk to businesses, especially small business entrepreneurs, and I ask them if they're in MWBE, they tell me, they say, well, it's hard to get certification. The process is arduous. It needs to be streamlined. And some say, well, I've outgrown, the qualifications for being an MWBE, which means that even though I'm a small business, I can't be certified as an MWBE and get certain monies, grants, loans, and also be qualified to get certain business from prime contractors that need to hire MWBEs. So my idea is that we do something different, create a small business certification. Maybe we can create a certification with those businesses that need to be certified as a small business, but cannot be certified because of the current regulations as an MWBE. maybe we can create something like a new small business regulatory commission, somebody, an agency that can assist businesses with the processes which become small businesses and to be able to keep their certification. If you have businesses that are trying to do the right thing, we shouldn't have an agency that is punitive. We should have an agency that really, helps them to reduce redundancies. If there are things that are being done that are duplicative, then we should make sure that it's an easier process and makes it's easier for people to see that this is a redundant, law right here. We don't need to have this. I talk to people all the time who have businesses about some of the laws that are on the books. And some of the laws don't make sense. Some of the laws are just, they're harmful to small businesses.
Yeah.
In my barber shop, my barber talks about the fact, he calls it, it's a hair salon, right? I go to a hair salon, like I need a hair salon. Okay? But my barber talks about the fact that he's like, we are getting fined for having an awning that is 6 inches longer than it should be to the sidewalk. They're telling us to take the whole awning down. Why is that? So maybe we can create a new regulatory commission that would not be just, would be less punitive and really assist these businesses that are trying to do the right thing and just trying to really make a dollar and not trying to hurt the community, but offering a service the community needs. We have so many fees that are associated with, filing, to become an MWB. The process, as I said, needs to be streamlined. We need to make sure that it is not as onerous and make sure also it doesn't cost so much. Filing fees. This is really something that is onerous on small businesses. You're trying to start a small business and there's all these forms for registration fees just to register your company as a MWB. Again, if you're already set and you've qualified for being an MWBE with certain things, it's redundant to then say, well, you should qualify in these other areas that are very similar.
First of all, I think one thing that's very important here as well is the fact that a lot of people don't even know the fees associated with trying to get into that until they are, trying to get that BE. Like there is no conversation about that kind of education in our communities. And then we get there and then there's all these fees. So I think it's really impactful that we start to look at, like, how do we get rid of some of that? That makes sense. We're really serious about equity, in our community. So,
and Jermaine, if you start a franchise, say you decide to start a franchise, right? I just had, one of the new franchise owners for Chick-fil-A who was going to be set up right outside of right in Five Towns, actually, right outside of Queens, right? Right past Hook Creek Road. He talked about the fact that he couldn't find a place, that was not as onerous to establish in New York City in Southeast Queens because of the rules and guidelines that was set forth to establish a business such as his. He found it easier, more profitable to set up in Five Towns as opposed to Southeast Queens. And so now he's establishing a business in Five Towns. But there's so much money that it takes to start up a business. And if you have a franchise, there are franchise fees you have to pay to the parent company. So now you're paying, you're holding on to your money because you've got so much to get this property renovated and you've got to spend to get the property renovated. You've got to pay franchise fees, all of this while you're still recruiting people to run this business. You haven't even started the business and there's so much money coming out. We've got to make it easier for small business owners to establish and start their businesses within the city. And of course, if we can do that throughout the state, that would be very, very helpful to business throughout the state, especially those that really want to. I mean, this is a business owner who comes from Southeast Queens, and grew up in this area and wanted to establish something here. The state is onerous enough. We've got to do something to make sure it's easier for people to be able to go through the process and to qualify. And I think, again, A separate agency to be able to help and assist with that would be great. A separate certification for small businesses so that they can qualify would be great also. But let me continue. Let me let you continue. I just wanted to just mention that.
Yeah, no, that was that. First of all, that was a great dive into the small businesses and the things that are really kind of holding us back from levels of greatness that we know is possible. And I love those ideas so far. I'm sure there are more that are out there, but I think those really hit some key points. But I'd love to transition to another conversation right now in the same vein, but economic development. So besides small businesses, how can you create more high quality jobs for local residents? And just for those that are listening, watching, paying attention, I have some notes that I have here on the side. So that's what I'm looking down at. Just trying to make sure that we keep in line with the conversation and in a nice orderly fashion. So that's what I'm looking down at. So just to repeat the question again, Dr. Andrews, besides the small businesses, and I know we just went into that for an extended period of time, how can we create more high quality jobs for the local residents of our communities?
So I think there's a few things we can do, right? We've talked to a number of businesses and a number of business owners. In fact, we've spoken to property owners in the downtown Jamaica area who want to establish, developments, who want to see or at least inquire about the possibility of building high rises. We're okay with responsible development. I want to see affordable, low income housing, right? So I think, again, we can do things like create developments where we have anchor tenants, people who are city agencies. We have a lot of city agencies that are in Manhattan and in Brooklyn. Some of the really, the more prosperous areas in Brooklyn and Manhattan, who would be paying a lot less to be here in Jamaica. And we're easily accessible for people from outside of the borough, whether it's Brooklyn or Manhattan. We have a train right here at Archer and Sutphin. Long Island Railroad's right here. We also have a train at Archer and Parsons Boulevard. So Archer Avenue, Parsons Boulevard. So why can't we attract city businesses and maybe get one or two city businesses to be anchor tenants? Put them in a development, in could be a housing development, where we have an anchor tenant there, we have businesses there. Could be something mixed use. We have also residential too. But again, if we get an anchor tenant, a city agency to decide that they will come here and certainly pay a lot less than they would in most areas of Brooklyn now and Manhattan, we could probably attract a lot of businesses to be a part of this development. And then, the second piece of this, and I was talking to the owner of BK Lobster about this the other day, another small business, another business that I love, BK Lobster. I love to eat there, great food. They do a great job. Anyway, talking to them about creating, opportunities. If we had an anchor tenant or two downtown Jamaica to create a nightlife. So now, if you live here, you might decide that you want to live in the same building that, maybe, you're working in. Or if you have a building down here and that's an anchor tenant for other businesses, then maybe you decide you want to purchase a condo or co-op, or you want to live in a rent stabilized apartment that's not too far from the business. So we get more people who are moving to the downtown Jamaica area. And in addition to that, now we create a nightlife because we have a lot more people coming in and people working in this community from this city agency. Say it's ACS, and they have a place in Brooklyn, which they've been working out of, which is really old. I mean,
Yes.
dilapidated from everything I hear.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll just take ACS, for example, right? We bring ACS here. And now some people decide, well, hey, I don't want to live too far. I don't want to live in Brooklyn anymore. Maybe I want to move here. And now some people from ACS decide, well, why do we want to go and hang out now in Brooklyn, in downtown Brooklyn? Because we'd like to be able to do something here in Jamaica.
Right.
Well, let's create a nightlife I was talking to the owner of BK Lobster about this other day. He was like, we have a back area to BK Lobster, and maybe we could do something on warm nights in the spring and the summer. Create like a nice, nightclub atmosphere in the back. Maybe that's something we could do. And I said, you know what? We want to do this like downtown Brooklyn. We want people to be able to work, come home, and go out in downtown Jamaica, just like in downtown Brooklyn or Harlem. We should have the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
I want the same thing for our residents here. Continue, Jermaine. You probably have other questions.
No, I mean, yeah, that is, I'm ready to have a good time, in downtown Jamaica. And yes, ACS building needs a lot of work. Over here would be perfect, just understanding the dynamic of like how that dollar kind of folds into the community really speaks to the broader macro level ability, that you're having of viewing the issues that we have in the community. But continuing down that same kind of path, with relation to quality jobs and opportunities, is there any other kind of untapped resource, any other ability that you can find to, like, I know this is asking a lot, obviously, because it's like, a well of ideas and just putting it out there, but yeah, is there anything else that you think we can do?
There are two things that I love that have great possibilities. I wouldn't even say two things, two places that have great possibility for even more employment. So the two largest employers of Southeast Queens right now are Queens Hospital Center, which I chaired the board for several years, as you know, and sat on the board for close to 2 decades and received the Marjorie Matthews Lifetime Achievement Award. The first one to receive that from the Health and Hospital Corporation for my work in Health and Hospital, and Queens Hospital Center. And York College. Those are the two largest employers, the place I worked, and the other place that I spent was my second home, Queens Hospital Center, right? So the indigent care pool, the formula needs to be just, we need to do something differently. The formula is not good. The formula doesn't take into account the formula from the indigent care pool, the money from the indigent care pool. The formula is not fair. What happens with the indigent care pool? The money comes into the state and then the money is dispersed. The money is dispersed to all hospitals supposedly equally. It's supposed to be distributed fairly based upon the amount of uninsured patients you have. I sat on the indigent care formula task force for several months, close to a year, as an appointment by the governor. About 2 years ago, we tried to reform the formula to see if we could, really do something different. And we came with a lot of ideas. We couldn't get the votes to do it, unfortunately, because a lot of the private hospitals were making a lot of money, or getting, I should say, a lot of money from the indigent care pool, because they were saying, well, we have a large share of indigent patients. Well, the truth is that if you don't have people with insurance, it's not necessarily because the people can't afford insurance. Sometimes it's because they're rich, Jermaine, and they don't need insurance. So when you talk about indigent, you may show, if you're New York Presbyterian, let's say, and I'm not picking on New York Presbyterian, but I'll just pick a large private hospital. You may show that you have a large uninsured population, i.e. indigent, but it's not really. You have a large uninsured population because the people that are going to New York Presbyterian have the money and don't need insurance. So New York Presbyterian gets a disproportionate share of the money, as opposed to some place like Jamaica or Queens, which is right in the heart of Jamaica.
Wow.
It should be receiving more money. So it's really an unfair system. And until that formula is fixed, it's irretrievably broken, right? Here's the problem. With that, now, you can't receive the money you should be receiving as a hospital that's serving the truly indigent. Because if you did receive the money that you should be receiving, say New York Presbyterian may be getting $1 million, maybe even $30 million less than they would, and maybe Jamaica and Queens would be receiving another $10, $15 million each. What could you do with that money? Hire more people. York College, we have a project that's been on the books now, the Academic Village Core Conference Center. And this project has been on the books, and the state official who was representing this area who just happens to be somebody we know very well, who is my opponent, has been, this has been on the books for us to be able to get for about 15 to 20 years now. And 15, 20 years, she's been saying, I'm working on it, trying to get this done. But the bottom line is, the bottom line is that 15 years, 20 years, within that amount of time, Medgar Evers has had 3 different projects, 3 different projects that have been done. So they've had buildings going up, high-rise buildings going up, and we have 2 temporary buildings at York College that have been temporary since the 1980s, let alone this Academic Village Core Conference Center, which is almost no closer to being finished than when it was started. 15 years, it's been on the drawing board. $45 million has been accumulated for this project in 15 years. We need $380 million. If we could create this Academic Village Core and Conference Center, we could have a world-class conference center for people to come from all around CUNY, all around the world to present. Imagine professors from Belgium or Great Britain coming to present papers to our academic community in New York City and doing it right at York College. How much money could we make from something like that? And so with that, a new building, you have to hire people, right? You have to hire maintenance people. You have to hire people for construction to build it. You have to hire people from the trades to get the skilled trades to get this done. We could have so many businesses in this community actually benefit from the creation or the, let's just say, first of all, the funding of this Academic Village Core Conference Center at York College. How many jobs could be created just from that? Probably thousands. Just a couple of things I can think of that we've talked about, and they're easy things to do. You just need to have the passion and the wherewithal to be able to do stuff like this. So the bottom line is, because I've been at York College and I'm at Queens Hospital, I know about these projects and I know what we can do, or I should say, I know about these initiatives. I know about these things, and I know how we can create more jobs just by getting these things to happen.
Yeah, that's what, an exhaustive list of 6 or more ideas and like that I feel like will transform what our communities look like. So that's exciting to hear. Let's switch gears once again. I know we're bouncing and the conversation is much needed. So racial wealth gap. Okay, besides jobs, Black wealth is where we see the greatest impact of systemic racism. How do you believe that government policies address the racial wealth gap that we see all around us?
So I think, we go back to MWBs, right? And we need to increase MWB funding, right? To allow MWBs to really compete for multi-million-dollar contracts. A lot of times they just tell me, a lot of the businesses say, I can't compete, Tony. I can't compete with these large contractors. I just can't compete. So we need to assist them. We need to streamline the payments to MWBs, right? Because a lot of them tell me they take on these jobs and they barely have enough money to get through this project. And then they're not being paid from the prime contractor. Some of them tell me that after the work is finished, they're waiting 6, 7 months to get payment from the prime contractor. If you have a prime contractor and you're waiting 6, 7 months and you have a small business, you could be bankrupt by the time you get paid for a huge job that you've been subcontracted for. We've got to be able to streamline the payments so that they get their payments a lot sooner than they have been, because a lot of them say it's just too onerous. So you ask us to take on these jobs and we want to take on these jobs so we can say that we have capacity to do this. But then when we get these jobs with these contractors, it could take months for us to get paid, not just during the work, but after we've even finished the job. We have a marijuana industry that is being created now. Some people like it, some people don't like it. The bottom line is that there's a vibrant legalized marijuana industry that is now being created in New York State.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that Black men were going to jail for years for is now suddenly legal. Well, who's going to benefit from this, Jermaine? Well, I think, again, we've got to do something about making sure that the people who are allowed to do this, to get involved with this industry, that we make sure the state gives an opportunity for people of color. If we were the ones disproportionately hurt by this, the sale of marijuana, as people were doing, in the 80s, when marijuana was huge, and we were the ones who were held accountable for the marijuana plague, and now it's legal, then I think the people of color have got to be able to benefit from it. So let's make sure that we have racial equity. That is legal, and everybody else is making money. Let's make sure we can make money, since a lot of us, a lot of men and women went to jail for selling it years ago when it was illegal. And let's give a preference to people who've gone to jail and served time for doing this. Let's give them an opportunity to get in on this too, right? And then let's see if we can create union jobs out of this, so that it's a unionized industry, so that people are not taken advantage of.
Yeah, I mean, we can go into that conversation. Just the idea of equality versus equity when it comes to legalized marijuana. It's a thing. This is an opportunity for New York to get it right, and I think this is an opportunity for leadership to be there doing the right thing. And it seems like with this idea about bringing about equity is the right thing to do. So I'm excited to hear that that's one of things that you believe in. More in terms of, I know that there's a conversation, just looking at my notes again, I know that there's a conversation around debt reform. Many people from my generation, have been dealing with this. Personally, just a little bit of an antidote, there was a lot of years of sacrificing and losing and driving a 1993 Camry, with over 175,000 miles on it when I was just trying to purchase my home. And it was student loans that was the crux of everything for me. Tell me a little bit about, your plans with relation to what should happen with student loans. And obviously, we can all say, get rid of them, but what should actually happen with relation to student loans and that whole crisis?
So I think that we can, I'd like to see if we can create a debt refinance fund, a New York State debt refinance fund, where students can actually get, now you look at the options you have, right? And you talk about the options that you may have in terms of refinancing. You may go to Nelnet, or you may go to another one. That's what I do with my student loans, right? You look at the best options and say, somebody says, wait a second, I got a better option for you. And all right, let me try them. Maybe these guys are better, right? Not really, right? So why can't we have a New York State debt refinance fund? So where people can go, run by the state, right? And graduates with debt and students with debt could get refinanced at much lower rates. They would have to commit to live in New York and work in New York for a number of years, possibly throughout the entirety of the loan, to make sure that New York is getting its money back, right? But it's possible to do this. And it's possible then to reduce major debt. If most of the debt is coming from people of color, which it is, then let's find a way to increase generational wealth by making sure that that's not a burden for the next generation. Because what happens, Jermaine, is studies have shown that people have this debt from college. Their debt, unfortunately, continues to hinder them to do the things they need to do to build wealth.
That's right.
So if they can't build wealth, then you can't have generational wealth for the next generation, because you haven't had an opportunity to buy or invest in stocks or to buy property, because you're still paying off this massive student loan. Also, if we're going to do something about debt, let's make sure that CUNY and SUNY are debt free. I've talked about this all over the place. Free CUNY, free SUNY. Novel idea, right? No, it wasn't novel. It was something that was done, when CUNY was started. CUNY was free. But then all of a sudden, we had a lot of people of color started attending CUNY, and all of a sudden, coincidentally, people started having to pay, take CAP, loans, SEEK, all these programs came out to help Black people and Latinos, people of color, started having to pay for their tuition. But when it first got started, CUNY got started, a lot of people who were not of color went to school for free. We need to get back to that. We need to get back to SUNY, um, being free. And that way the students won't have that debt.
Yeah, you're speaking my kind of language, you're speaking my wife's kind of language too. I mean, there has to be some real conversations about that. And I know, from my generation and just being, watching what they say on social media about, canceling debt and et cetera, I know a good portion of what was happening, what was supposed to be helping me was from the state, and it wasn't, in the form of a TAP. And, these type of things that would just disappear after, year one at Hofstra University at tier 3 school. But moving on, let's talk a little bit about the income, the expenses of the Black family household, dealing with it now, child care. Wow, expensive. Where do you land on that? What do you see that's happening? Is there anything that we can do?
Yeah, we can increase the subsidy and, try to see if we can lift some of the barriers to childcare for families. We've got to make sure that daycares, that there are a lot more providers. We just had a huge event at Baisley Park with the small provider daycares. And they talked about the fact that they weren't receiving the money that people thought they were receiving. I mean, the governor stated that there was $1 billion allocated for private daycare, right? They were like, no, that's not true, Dr. Andrews. And they said, come out and we want to talk to you about, why we can't keep our doors open. First of all, a lot were hit by the pandemic. So they get these subsidies from these agencies, sometimes, city agencies, state agencies, to be able to bring kids in. If you have a private daycare, the home daycare is what we call them, right? That some of these providers are getting paid approximately $6 an hour to take care of a child. And that's to feed the child also, Jermaine. That's not just to provide recreational. It's not a babysitting service. They're teaching the kid, they're feeding the kid, they're caring for the child while the child is at work. So we've got to make sure that they are getting proper reimbursement and increase the subsidies for working families so that people can afford to actually put their kids in childcare. And so that the childcare providers that are doing the job actually are getting paid fairly. You can't tell me that a person who is caring for an infant, and you know now better than anybody, recently in your household, you had an addition not too long ago, Jermaine, and you're telling me that you could get paid $3 an hour to take care of your daughter.
Ludicrous. Okay. So we spend a lot of time there. We do. And I definitely want to make sure that we're giving the right amount of time to our next subject.
Of course, the ultimate, Jermaine, is universal daycare, but that goes without saying, right?
Okay. That's a whole, right.
Daycare for all. That takes care of it all. No problem. You ain't got to worry about it then, Jermaine. Daycare for all, universal daycare. Honey, we're going to work. We got a child care provider ready for us. Boom.
All
ready
right.
to go.
Let me rein in this conversation I'm in charge of here, sir. All right. Public safety. Let's get there. Let's talk about it. We with the Fred Wilson Democratic Club, we have a conversation that's coming up, and I'm actually looking forward to getting a lot of things on the table. But for this conversation specifically, with crime on the rise across New York City, right, we see strong pushback to reforms enacted during the Black Lives Matter movement. How will you balance rising crime with the needed police reforms?
So we talked about police reform ad nauseum, right? And it's a subject now that is on the newspaper's front page every single day. It's in the media, on social media pages, platforms, every single day. I talked to somebody about this the other day, and I was meeting with an organization, a good government group, and they said, well, Dr. Andrews, we're not for more law enforcement. I said, well, in my community, they probably want more law officers. However, I do think that we need to spend funding for crisis management teams, because it shouldn't just be police officers that are on the scene, because sometimes there's somebody with mental illness or somebody that is emotionally disturbed and their family's involved, and they're trying to calm the person down and they just can't do it. So they call the police in, and sometimes it escalates.
Crisis management team. Give
Yep.
me more on that.
So we could have counselors, social workers, people who could assist with people in the midst of a crisis, Jermaine.
Yeah.
Law enforcement officers now aren't enforce the law. That's what they're there to do. If you're breaking the law, they're going to enforce it, right? They're not trained to be, social workers or mental health counselors, or, we need to have crisis management teams on the scene for situations that could be explosive. 911 could then be, if you called and you told them about a situation, they wouldn't just be calling the cops. They could say, well, we're going to have to send in a crisis management team. We're going to send in EMS. We're going to send in police officers. We're also going to send in a social worker or we're going to send in somebody from, this person has had psychiatric problems before. So we're going to send somebody in from Queens Hospital Center, from the psychiatric ward, somebody who they may know who can talk to this person if they've been there. And they said, maybe the family calls and said, we just got them out of the psychiatric ward and they're having some real issues. So they can send somebody maybe from a local hospital to assist with this. So we've got to give them more options than just, okay, we're sending the police, right? That takes care of that. Then obviously we can look at focused deterrence. A lot of times, we've talked about community policing. We continue to talk about community policing, but sometimes you can get law enforcement officers from the community police unit, some who are undercover, to come in and assist us with finding the bad guys before they act again. A lot of times in communities, it's only a few people that are really the real bad guys that are causing problems and causing trouble for the neighborhood. But it seems that everybody knows who these guys are, but nobody wants to say anything, right? So folks deterrence is where you can bring in law enforcement officers working with the community and finding out who these people are and trying to make sure that you stop them before the next burglary or the next assault. It's quietly done. That's why it's deterrence. You're trying to deter them from committing other crimes by catching them and trying to deal with them before they enact another crime. I also have some other ideas. There are real issues in our community with dumping, right? Dumping is illegal. It's a quality of life issue. People are asking, what are we doing about dumping? The other thing we found out on the doors, people say, I've got these tractor trailers parked on my block. They're parked across the street. They're stopping people from parking. They leave these tractor trailers there all day. Sometimes people are doing stuff behind these big tractor trailers because you can't see behind the tractor trailers. We wonder if somebody walks behind the tractor trailer and the other side is a park and nobody's in the park late at night, what can happen, right?
Right.
So we hear about people talking about speeding and the speed cameras, but what if we could do something else, right? Let's use these cameras and use the technology we have available right now to expand the operation of these speed cameras. Let's use them to catch people who are illegal dumping, catch their license plates. Let's use them to catch people who are illegally parking these trailers on the streets for 2 or 3 weeks and to find them. We have the technology to do this. People talk about these mufflers, the modified mufflers. Now it's supposed to be against the law right now, right? But the police officers, they don't have time to do it. We need to have the police officers focused on real violent crimes, right? But what if we use these cameras and modify these cameras? So instead of the shot spotter that is now being triggered by these mufflers, we also had a camera that could pick up these guys with these modified mufflers that are getting the police to head off in one direction as opposed to another direction where they could be used for needed, just because the shot spotter thinks that there are gunshots going off. What if these cameras were triggered and they could actually take down the license plates? I mean, if it's illegal, right, Jermaine?
Right.
So they can be fined, right?
Right.
So we shouldn't only be concerned about speeding. We should be concerned about some of the quality of life issues, which we can address if we modify these cameras. A neighbor that, I talked to on the phone the other day, talked about the fact that there was an all-night party going on, 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock in the morning, blasting the music next door. And the neighbors really didn't care. I'm for those quality of life issues, man. You and I talked about this 2 years ago, right? What about the firecrackers, right? You can't find these guys with the firecrackers, right? We talked to the precinct officers. They're like, where are these guys? You were like, they're keeping up my baby. I can't get to sleep. I got up with my baby. My baby's scared. I get it. So what if we had cameras that were modified to catch up all of these noise complaints that people were talking about? But they can't. Now, listen, if you're a responsible neighbor, and people think it's too loud, you turn the music down, that's fine. If you're irresponsible, you're doing things, you just don't care, because all you care about is your property and what you're doing and having fun, then maybe law enforcement needs to deal with that too. But again, we don't need the police to come out where it may escalate. We now have a camera that's been modified that can catch those guys outside with the firecrackers, keeping you up at night, keeping your baby up. We can catch the neighbor who's blasting the music. We can even catch that guy who zooms down the block doing 50 miles an hour, who's blasting his car so loud that it sets off 2 or 3 car alarms. And now you can't get back to sleep because the car alarm is bump, 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 bump. And now you're woken, your family is awoken. I mean, we have the technology. We can modify cameras to do something more than catch speeding. We can deal with the quality of life issues, freeing up the police officers to take on the real crimes. Let them tackle the real issues. Expanding the cameras in our areas and expanding using the technology is not going to take much to modify the cameras. And again, we have the technology available to do it. And if we do it, Jermaine, it'll pay for itself. The fines that are racked up will pay for the camera system. I'd like to start a pilot program in our community. And guess what? If it reduces these issues, then the quality of life for all of us obviously increases. It gets better for all of us, right? We're not talking about the few who just, they're only concerned about having fun. We're really talking about the neighbors. And the biggest issue by far, Jermaine, you'll probably hear this. We're going to be knocking on doors next week while you run the Federalist Democratic Club as our executive director. But I'm sure you're going to hear this. We heard it last year. We're going to hear it again. The biggest quality of life issue in our community is noise.
Yeah, noise complaint. Yeah, a lot of stuff you touched there. A lot of, just the idea of repurposing or reusing the technology associated with things that are just piling up on my desk, those cameras. Not that I'm a speeder, but 31 miles per hour, they'll catch you and send that home. But using that for good as well, I think is just as valuable, because it is a quality of life issue, and it is something that plagues our communities in a very unique way, I think, compared to other parts of New York City. Talk to me about the police officers, though. When we talk about police officers, what can we do there? And I'm going to be listening for some keywords, like I'll let you say them, but because I have some actual pushback that I'd love to give you and hear what you have to say about that. So what ideas do you have around the policing and how we can do something there?
So, I've gone and spoken to muster the officers, the new officers, the rookie officers at 103rd Precinct. In fact, I think I was the only officer, the only elected official, party or public official, that spoke to the police officers at muster at the 103rd Precinct, because I was invited. And I was the only one at the time who they said they felt comfortable with inviting, because they felt I was fair on both sides. I felt like, we should be, that yes, our community wants more law enforcement officers on the streets to protect us. But I also said, I want us to have them respect, and we need to have trust. We need to really, again, have trust in our law enforcement community. And so respect is one thing. And I said, they have to respect the residents of our community. And I told these officers when I spoke to them, I said, we want you to respect, protect, and serve our residents. Those 3 things. So, 1, establish a New York City residency requirement for all law enforcement officers. I don't necessarily need to be grandfathered in, because some people are living in Long Island or Westchester now. I don't necessarily need to be, moving back to New York. But I want everybody who is becoming a New York City police officer to live here and reside with the people that they're policing, the communities and the communities they're policing. And with that, continue to prioritize community policing, right? Working with the community, building that trust, I've had great relationships with our law enforcement community, 103rd and the 113th precinct. These guys have a great deal of respect for me, and I want them to respect the community. And if I hear about incidents, I call the commander and I tell him and I say, what are we doing about this? And the commander addresses it. If there's something that is that needs to be addressed, let's just say. And I think, again, we've got to push reforms that that limit the criminalization of poverty. A lot of times officers go out and they'll give fines. That's what we started talking about, finding people for the quality of life crimes that started a few years ago. And then, Mayor de Blasio said, we're not going to do that anymore. Well, I think that, you can still address issues that impact the quality of life for our residents, but let's deal with them in a more fair way, because people in our community do not have the same level of income as my friends in Middle Village.
Yes.
Right.
So just to pin there, I would like to just acknowledge my failure as a host. I have not looked at the chat until just now. So there are a lot of questions there. We're going to get to each and every one. We're just going to go down the line. I thank you for your patience, everyone. While this conversation was going on, I was just like really into it. So, Dr. Andrews, get ready for those questions. They're coming from the audience, and we're going to jump into that. But just to kind of pull it in, you said police officers having a New York City resident requirement, right?
Yeah.
And was there another?
We talked about community policing. Really expanding community.
All right.
Policing.
So just a quick question, and this is just a point of privilege as the host.
Yep.
I guess my idea of community policing requires for people to be a part of the community. And I think that what I was actually saying I was going to push back on is you answered with one leading into two, like there should be some resident requirement so they can understand our communities, because you can't go to Gun Hill and Jamaica Avenue and expect the same kind of action happening around you. So how could you police it the same way? But the idea of them having the New York City residence requirement, having some type of connection to us before we talk about them doing any community policing. So I think those are two great coinciding points that work together. Next thing, community, the push for policy reforms. Like, tell me about the criminalization of poverty. Tell me a little bit about what are your talking points there. I want to make sure we nail this in, and then I'm going to get to these questions.
As we talked about, let's have a sliding scale fee for those people who are in our communities of color. In other words, if we have the same fee for people across the board, right? And if we can't say, well, people of color and people, I shouldn't say just people of color, but people of low income are paying less, then let's do something different. All right. So if you can't create that sliding scale fees, everybody has to pay the same fee, and it's not income driven, which I think it should be and can be, then possibly what we can do is, okay, maybe you can do community service and pay your fine if you can't afford the fine that was levied by doing community service. And maybe we'll say it's worth $25 an hour. So if you have to do 50 hours of community service, that's the equivalent of 50 hours times $25 an hour. And that's what you're paying back the state, as opposed to paying a fee. You're paying it back in community service hours. That's something we could do. What about what about if we do something like that? What if we now begin to think about, as opposed to people who are not paying fines, people who may not be able to pay the fines at all? And this is what we talked about for a long time, and some of the reform in the district attorney's offices. A person's not able to pay the fine, and so the fines mount up. Mm-hmm. And when the fine that they had just continues to rise, and all of a sudden, so that they've not paid the fine, they're arrested, taken to court, and because they now can't, sometimes the bail was set and they couldn't pay the bail, they were held. Some of these people, for something as simple as an infraction where they couldn't pay a fine, were held for periods of time which were unjustifiable, just because, and that's what we talk about, the racialization of poverty, right? Mm-hmm. Just because they couldn't afford to pay the fine. So again, these are ideas that I think we might be able to use to combat the racialization of poverty with law enforcement.
Okay, thank you for those. You know, we're talking about poverty, we're talking about equity. This is like a lot of equity talk that I'm feeling on this conversation. So glad we're having it. So let me just come back in. And this is a jump, you know, this is a jump back, right? So one of the questions was, how would Dr. Andrew, first of all, I don't know if you guys can hear that, it's bath time and she's as loud as she can be during bath time, which is, you know, fine, you know. Anyway, how would you, Dr. Andrew, start these business incubators? That was the question that was asked in the chat.
Okay, I haven't looked in the chat obviously either. So again, you can receive state money. You can even receive federal money. In fact, there was an opportunity, as I said, for us to have this done years ago. Federal money is being provided to create a business incubator. And the money from a state official was used to do something totally different. So the money can come from the federal government or the state official or the state government.
Okay, all right, sounds good. That's a straightforward answer. Let's call this lightning round. All right, moving on. Why is it so difficult for South Jamaica residents to get small business loans, but most of the business owners here are outsiders? This is from Sharon B. Thank you for the question and thank you for your patience while we asked it, Sharon.
It's the onerous process that business owners are facing all over. It's not just Southeast Queens. Unfortunately, I've talked to residents in Harlem, business owners in Harlem, I should say, and business owners in South Brooklyn also saying it's the same thing. It's the onerous process of getting and this is why I thought about this creating a new state small business certification. So that if you can't be certified as an MWBE, the state would certify you as small business so that you can still be qualified to get certain to be able to get money, grants, loans, and also to be able to subcontract on certain initiatives. We have to do something different because the process is so onerous. It needs to be streamlined, and it's so difficult, you know, to meet the criteria.
Right.
So it's unfortunately businesses all over. It may seem like it's just Southeast Queens, and my impact is going to be in Southeast Queens. I want to see us fill up all those strips: Rockaway Boulevard, Sutphin Boulevard, Guy Brewer Boulevard. I want Merritt Boulevard from Baisley back down to Jamaica Avenue, where it's a little bit depressed, except for the Allen area. I want to see all those strips look just like the 29th Assembly District, where Baisley Boulevard down to Cross Island Parkway. You have accountants, you have lawyers, you have barbershops, you have everything there. You have a big Stop and Shop there. I want to see Sutphin Boulevard, Guy Brewer Boulevard, and Rockaway Boulevard look the same. And I want to see small businesses there. You know, and once you're able to establish the small business communities along those corridors, if the people don't live in this community, they're not going to want to live too far from their business. So they'll probably buy property or, you know, purchase a co-op or a condo in downtown Jamaica or someplace close to their business. You know, that's going to create vibrancy in our community that we haven't had in a very long time. It's developing the economic corridors, and that creates an economic engine for us to be able to use for all the things that we need to use money for, or we need to have money for, that are not being provided by the government. Because I want us to be self-subsistent. I'm sorry, here's somebody's not muted. Go on. JSA.
Oh yeah, and the next, I caught you before you told me my mic was muted. Thank you.
That's right.
But Sharon B also says, and after this, we're gonna get into the portion where we're gonna field questions from the audience briefly, but Sharon B also says, besides selling pot, what are you gonna do for contractors who are not getting paid for months?
Well, you know, I talked about that briefly earlier. We've got to, first of all, streamline the process so that it allows small businesses to get paid a lot sooner, right? And we've got to make sure that we enforce upon the businesses, the large business, the big companies that are not paying these small businesses on time. We've got to enforce that. So all the departments that are investigating this stuff, we've got to fund them, make sure they're properly funded, and also to make sure that they're doing their job. And as an elected official, I don't care if we have to have hearings on this to make sure that people are doing their jobs. We give them the resources, then we make sure that they do their jobs. We make sure that these large corporations, these large companies are investigated. I want to find out, I did this at Health and Hospital Corporation, Jermaine. I came as the chairperson of the Council of Community Advisory Boards. And the one thing I said was, so we have all these hospitals that are being fixed up now. some hospitals received major damage during Hurricane Sandy. And so we have these large contractors, right? These large contractors that are doing this work, they're making a lot of money. I said, how many MWBs do we have that are contractors, subcontracted to work in these big projects? And I said, I want a number and I want a list of them. And then I said, are they being paid in a timely manner? And so there's not enough money to investigate this right now, but we do have the New York State Department of Labor, other agencies that can get involved to investigate this to make sure that people are being paid in a timely manner. That is the biggest issue I hear from small businesses, MWBs in particular, who say, we said we had the capacity to do this, but how long can we wait to get paid? It seems like we're barely getting enough money, and then we have to put out so much money of our own just to keep on this job and to keep doing what we need to do. And then we get finished with the job, we're waiting months afterwards, which we can't afford to do because we put all this money out just to be able to do the job. So those are my possible solutions to that.
Okay, got it. Thank you for that. So moderator, if possible, can you allow for our guests to unmute themselves and raise their hands, and we're going to acknowledge them for them to ask Dr. Anthony Andrews some questions regarding jobs in public safety. So please feel free, let me know once it is, and please raise your hand. Everyone can now unmute. Thank you.
And they can turn on their videos too.
Yes, turn on the videos if you'd like. I'd love to see you and start feeling some of those questions. All right, let's see.
I see Mr. Wilson there. Mr. Wilson may have something to say. How you doing, Mr. Wilson?
Hi. Well, this morning the building, an official from the buildings department was here, and I went out and asked him about that marking that I showed you on the wall, and he told me that this is the boundary line. Now, I've been at this property for 39 years, and suddenly somebody's going to come and tell me. I pulled up the map from the city website, and it says my lot is 40 by 100. The neighbor's lot is 40 by 100. That property was not bought by a company, and they send surveyors on 2 occasions. The second time they make markings, which indicates that they're taking 4 feet of my property.
Right.
I've been at that property for 39 years, and all of a sudden somebody's going to come and tell me, the fence is over by 4 feet. Over my dead body, they're going to do that.
No, and we talked, we went out and we saw you, Mr. Wilson, and Mrs. Wilson, yeah. Good to see you. David Wilson, who is a renowned artist from our community, does a lot of good work, has done a lot of great shows. You can see some of the work that he's done in the background. Really creative artist and a renowned artist. We are going to give you an attorney that you can talk to about this, because again, as we talked about when we were out there, we said if he came back after you told him this, if that's what he was going to do, we're going to recommend an attorney to you that will be a good attorney for you to be able to take this case to court if he so chooses. But sometimes it's just a matter of getting a letter from an attorney that states, hey, we're on the case now. And we're saying that this is not the truth, that you're saying this. Now, I'm wondering, was there an attorney, did they have an attorney send you a letter, or they just say?
Not yet, I haven't seen anything yet.
Okay.
But the gentleman from the buildings department, I rushed out and asked him, what does that mean? He said, that's the boundary line. I said, how could it be? I've been here for 39 years this month, and all of a sudden this new owner comes and tells me this is the new boundary line. So and not only that, he's taking 4 feet from me and 1 foot from the next neighbor. And apparently the same thing was done on the next street on 136th Avenue.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Investors are taking
a 4 family replaces a 1 family, and they took a few feet from the neighbors, the large lot going to the end of Cranston. And now these people are coming in and telling me they're going to take 4 feet of my property. So
well, that's ridiculous. So what we're going to do is this. I want you to reach out. Amir gave you his number, right? Amir's
Yeah.
my right hand. He will then, we'll talk about this, and I will make sure, as he has me focused on the campaign stuff, that we get somebody to focus on your situation in particular and talk to you, so that you have somebody you can have a conversation with, so that if they get an attorney, or if they decide to move forward with this, you have somebody that you've talked to already who can then begin sending letters on your behalf.
I'd appreciate that, yeah.
You're welcome. We'll give you somebody good, Mr. Wilson.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you,
You're
Mr.
welcome, Mr. Wilson. Anytime.
Are there any questions for our candidate, Dr. Andrews? Please feel free, raise your hand to put your camera on, take your mic, your mute off, and ask away. We'd love to hear some more questions. I know we fielded some questions from the chat, which is really good and stimulating for conversation, but there are questions out there. I'd love for us to address them. So I want to leave that space now. We have hands here. Let me check the hand side. No? Okay. That works too. So I'll ask a question. Oh, there's another thing. Hold on. All right. So homes are the biggest assets. What will you do for homeowners? So thank you for all those that are sending me messages privately. This is about the fourth one I've got now. You may be a little uncomfortable asking in the larger group, but homes are the biggest assets. What will you do for homeowners? Very direct question. I want to know, what will you do for homeowners, sir?
So we talked a little bit about this in a previous Zoom. So the biggest issue for our homeowners today is property tax. Each one of our homeowners talks about the fact that they are paying more in property tax than they have ever paid, and that every year this continues to rise. So what I've said, we're not going to endorse to people, is this: we're going to work on trying to reform the property taxes, right? We can't be paying more in Southeast Queens than people in Belrose. It's just not realistic for the people who make so much more in terms of their income to be paying less than the people are paying here in Southeast Queens. We're going to see if we can fight that. We're going to fight foreclosure and zombie homes so that we can increase the value of communities all over, because of course, when you have zombie homes and foreclosures, that's a real issue. We talked about that a little bit before, making sure that families get financial counseling, or the option of financial counseling before then, and also before closing the deal, making sure that they are able to get mandated financial counseling so that they know what they're doing before they get into the deal. We're also talking about making sure that, of course, as we reform the property tax law, if we can, to make sure that we're paying the right amount of property taxes. We've got to make sure that it's addressed for homeowners throughout the state. But in particular, it can't be so unfair and onerous for the residents of Southeast Queens compared to some place, like I said, like Belrose or like Park Slope. The millionaires of Park Slope are even paying less than we are in property taxes in Southeast Queens. Obviously, if you pay less in taxes, you may be able to purchase another home in the community. Property is a big part of how families are able to accumulate wealth, and having property can create generational wealth. Not just you, but not just passing on the property to your kids and families afterwards, but of course, teaching your kids that real estate is a great way to increase their wealth. But we got to make sure the real estate in our community appreciates by making sure that people are not getting their homes foreclosed upon because they didn't know what they were getting into, and getting rid of the zombie homes, making sure that we do enough to develop our community so that the property value for everyone goes up.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, there is the question out there. Thank you, Sharon, again for another question. I think it was in line with what you're just saying. But why is it, do you think, that people in more prosperous neighborhoods, and it's quote unquote prosperous, are paying less property taxes than Cambridge Heights, Jamaica, et cetera, et cetera? Yeah,
it's a good question, and something that I've asked the governor, and the governor didn't have an answer for me, Jermaine. It was unfair when it was created, and it works for some people and it doesn't work for others. But the bottom line is the governor wasn't sure why it was still like this. So when the property tax formula was created, it was an unfair formula, but it's become more onerous and unfair to people of color, especially in our community, as the years have gone on. When I said to the governor, why is it like this? And the governor said, I'm not sure, but I'm going to do something to reform it. I'm going to address the issue this year. To the governor's credit, she did address it this year. She said, I would address it this year. The problem, Jermaine, is what happens next year? What happens the year afterwards? There's been nobody advocating for our homeowners in Southeast Queens to reduce our property taxes. I mean, I haven't seen it on anybody's literature and anybody saying they're going to fight for it in the state. Not that people, you know, maybe they will, Jermaine, but nobody's been fighting for it. So it can't. So I'm going to go to Albany and fight for not just our residents, but fight for residents throughout Southeast Queens to see if we can reform the property tax formula so that it's fair and not onerous and not overly onerous on people in our community as compared to some other communities in New York City.
Yeah, for such a progressive state, man, I tell you, we have some entrenched, you know, systemic problems that have been consistently holding us back. I mean, let's not get into a DEIB conversation right now. But I don't think there are any more questions. I don't see any more hands. Thank you for all those that asked questions. You know, it's very vital that your voices are heard. And, you know, the conversation that we had with Dr. Andrews tonight about jobs and public safety, and previously, let me just run down the list, and housing, housing and elderly, and youth and education, all vital conversations that we have to really had to have been addressed for our communities, because these are all things that are important to us. And we talk about quality of life being so important and high on that list, but these things are there that we see every day, that we feel every day, that we understand that it impacts our daily lives. So thank you for having that conversation. I would like to thank everyone for joining this conversation tonight. We're not over yet. A few announcements, and I'd love for you to hear it. And I'd definitely like for to give the mic or the floor to Dr. Andrews so that he can, in a sense, make his closing remarks, his closing pitch, his closing argument from these town halls to you, the voters, to encourage you all to vote and get another 10 people to vote as well. So Dr. Andrews, I'll pass the floor to you, and Amelia, after that, we'll be closing.
Okay, great. Sounds good. Listen, I want to thank you all for coming out tonight. You know, this is our last of the virtual town halls before the election. We hope everybody gets out and votes. Of course, vote Andrews for Progress, vote Dr. Anthony Andrews for Assembly, and re-election for Democratic District Leader, which allows me to organize the Democratic base so that we can organize on issues such as these issues that, such as the issues that we've organized around these town hall meetings. We do that through the Democratic Club during the year. God willing, we will be in office and we will be able to address these issues and have regular virtual meetings and in-person meetings throughout the community to be able to address all the concerns of the residents of this district. And hopefully I'll be able to do some things that will impact residents throughout the state. Check out our website, again, andrewsforprogress.com. All the town halls are available there. And of course, early voting starts on the 18th. And then primary election day is on the 28th. And I look forward to seeing you out there as I knock on doors and talking to you as I make phone calls. And I thank you all for coming and participating. I will turn it over to the host for the evening, the executive director of the Fred Wilson Democratic Club, Jermaine Sean Smith.
Dr. Andrews, I'd like to say thank you for taking the charge and running for office. I know we're not election day, we're still in May, but you know, the ground is swelling, the energy is there. I really see this happening in an organic way where people have bought in and understand your mission and vision for our communities. And I'd like to say thank you for taking up that mantle and having a lot of these conversations and bringing these ideas into Albany when it's that time. So thank you for that. Thank you for engaging my questions, my little personal rants, and also providing good anecdotes that will help us kind of understand some of these more complex subjects that kind of goes over the radar a lot of times. I think that's a quality that's very admirable in a leader such as yourself, being able to break it down for us so that we can truly understand. So thank you for that. I'd like to also thank our moderator, for always making sure things are moving smoothly for these conversations. And There are 22 days, two days until the polls open. That is like, you know, you blink and it's 22 days later. So, you know, the movement's happening, the movement's here, the movement is alive. 22 days till polls open. When people ask you, who should I vote for, right? Yeah, they're probably, somebody's gonna ask you that. Those people, you know who to tell them. You know who to tell them, because you guys have really been in line, in step with what Dr. Andrews has been saying. And for those who just now have joined, welcome. Welcome, because we do believe that there's an opportunity for change in our community, and it's going to be with Dr. Andrews. So in closing, he got all the good points. Go to his website, andrewsforprogress.com. I don't think we have to say WW anymore. We kind of get the picture. And then also, once again, Tuesday, June 28th, early voting starts June 18th to Sunday, June 26th, 22 days until election. So with no further ado, I'd love to say thank you all for joining us. I hope you all have a blessed Memorial Day weekend in celebration of all that, those that have done stuff for us, that have sacrificed for us in our way that we live. And I hope that we all can enjoy this time and get ready for another work week and getting ready to push Dr. Anthony Andrews across the finish line into the state capitol. So looking forward to that as well. So good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great night.
Good night.
Good evening.